to it, but right now on the programme we've got the Minister for State at the Department of Finance, Jennifer Carroll McNeill, with us on the line. And Minister, if I can first ask you to respond to the pretty stinging criticism of the Fiscal Advisory Council of the budget package. The council says effectively that you're overspending. You've breached the spending limits, your own spending limits, and this is too much of a stimulus at a time when the Irish economy is going very strongly indeed, and it risks the danger of increasing inflation.
It's a very significant challenge, there's no doubt, because on the one hand we're trying to manage inflation and bring it down, which we have been doing. Last year it was 8%, this year it's in and around 5%, and that was even with last year's stimulus package, where there was similar criticism about the effect that it would have on inflation. So it's something that we're hugely conscious of. Notwithstanding the additional supports we're providing to people, we do expect inflation to get down to 2% next year. So that would be a big swing from 8 to 2% over a 3-year period, 2 to 3 year period. So I absolutely recognise the importance of what IFAC is saying, but we also have to provide supports to people who really need it at a time of very tight finances for a lot of people. And that is a balance that a democratically elected government has to straddle all the time. It is really important that IFAC are engaged in this process. You know, they endorse our figures. I realise, you know, for example, in France, their government wasn't endorsed by their fiscal council, their government's budget. Ours is, and we work very closely and in alignment with IFAC. And another example of that is the government and IFAC both thought it was a good idea to create a Future Ireland fund. That was announced yesterday, where we've put 4 billion into. We're putting 4 billion into it at the moment, and then it'll be 0.8% of GDP every year from there on, to try to build a fund of €100 billion by 2035. And you know, Jerry, that's what it doesn't matter today or tomorrow, but it's a big.
It matters in the future, and they've welcomed that.
And it is
they have welcomed that.
So it's a
however,
bit of a balance,
they've said though substantial overruns in health this year don't appear to be incorporated, which raises questions about the health allocation and budget projections. The spending rule set to be broken out to 2026, which they believe severely undermines the path for Ireland's public finances. And they've also said the budget is likely to add to inflation, leaving it higher for longer. Those are the sort of things you're trying to tackle by paying out the once-off payments this year. But what happens if that means those prices are higher for longer, more pain down the line for everybody?
You know, that's what I'm saying, that we did this last year and faced similar criticism, and still inflation came down. We are trying to manage it in a combination way of not adding too much, but adding enough to be able to help people through. And the health budget is expanding, that's absolutely right. And part of that is because we have an increased population. Part of that is because we have a population that is ageing, and ageing well, and that we're able to provide treatments to people at longer, you know, at older stages of their lives, and provide successful treatments to people at older stages of their lives. Those things do cost more money. Notwithstanding that, there's a very significant challenge in health to reduce any waste where possible, to cut waiting times, and that has been successful in some areas and not yet in others. So there are more efficiencies that can be driven into the health system. But the very act of aging better, aging well, is always going to make a challenge in terms of our year-on-year health spending. So that is a problem that we know that we have, but we don't have, you know, there isn't an alternative to continue to meet the needs of our people. That has to happen as well.
Speaking of meeting those needs, €12 increase across the board in social welfare. What's your response to the criticism of that from different organisations representing those, saying €25 would have been a proper response to what people are?
Well, you see there again, so on the one hand we're just talking about inflation there, the other, you know, about providing supports to people and trying to strike a balance, and €12 strikes that. However, in pretty much all of those situations, people are going to benefit also from additional targeted support. So, for example, if you're on the fuel allowance, and we've brought most people over 70 into that, they will get a lump sum payment this year of €300. There's a double pension both in December and in January. There's a lump sum payment for living alone allowance. There's the energy credits. So it's never, I appreciate what they're saying in relation to €12. We're trying to strike the balance with inflation, but we're also making sure that people who are receiving that are also receiving other supports from the government, whether it's energy credits, lump sum payments, things that are once-off costs that we're not banking into the public finances forever and ever in perpetuity, which is something that IFAC would very definitely criticise. So this is about, I recognise all of these challenges and all of these criticisms and all of these questions, but somebody has to make a decision about what you spend year on year and how you try and get that balance balance right every time. And and the government has decided to try to put money away for the future in the Future Ireland Fund, which is hugely significant, and to spend the money in as balanced a way as possible to protect our public finances for the future, but also make sure that we try our best to meet the needs of people in a targeted way as much as possible this winter, as we did last winter.
Okay, Minister, can I ask you in relation to the wider scheme of things, where things go from here, and particularly regards to businesses? What do you say to small business owners who are not happy with the large increase in the minimum wage, saying it's going to add to the cost of doing business at a time when they're facing so many other high costs?
Yeah, and small business have actually, really been under pressure for quite a period, and we've tried to provide supports through the EWIS scheme, through the TBES scheme, a whole range of different supports for energy, for the COVID pandemic. But this is a new challenge, and I recognise quite how difficult it is for small business. We're trying so much as well to make sure there's support available. We have a €250 million fund in the Department of Enterprise to try to address some of that challenge as well. I don't know if you can hear me properly. There's some kind of feedback.
Yes, apologies for that, Minister. If you can hear me okay. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, that's much better. Sorry.
Yeah. Just in relation, in the time we have left as well, what do you say to the situation with regards to what you've done for renters, increasing the rent relief credit by €250, at the same time introducing a rent credit for landlords who commit to stay in the market for the next 4 years, trying to provide some certainty, trying to maybe stem the loss of landlords in the market? Landlord organisations are saying this is nowhere near enough. Much more was promised, that you over-promised in this area and under-delivered, and it's not going to make a difference in keeping long-term landlords in the market.
And we need to keep long-term landlords in the market. And, this is something that I would have liked to have done at an earlier stage, to provide some more support to landlords, because that supports tenants. You cannot have a tenancy without a landlord. We have increased the rent credit to €750 this year. It was €500 last year, and it was available to get €500 for the previous year. And I really would encourage people to try to avail of that relief, because so many people who are entitled to it haven't yet had the opportunity, I think, to go onto the Revenue Commissioners and claim it.
Should you not have done more for landlords this year, given you didn't do anything last year?
But again,
and then you saw the further people leaving the market?
But Jerry, this is always the challenge around the amount of resources that we have, and trying not to add too much to inflation, and still trying to get targeted supports to people. We must provide supports to landlords. It was in Focus Ireland's budget submission. They recognise the importance of keeping landlords in the market, and what we've done here is really targeted at landlords with 1 and 2 properties, who will get an increase in credit over the next 3 years as long as they stay in the market. And yes, we'd like to do more. And I think a big part of what landlords are telling me is around the culture of being a landlord, and how often they feel criticised and how often they feel vilified by some of the media commentary around being a landlord and what that means. Whereas actually many of them are 1 and 2 property landlords who are trying to stay in the market, trying to look after tenants that they may have had for a very long time, and we want them to stay in the market because we need them to.
Some of the opposition commentary, perhaps, are you critical of them for what they say about landlords?
I have been critical of the opposition in the past. I think that a one-sided conversation doesn't reflect the reality of, if I want to go out and get a tenancy, I need a landlord to do that. I want a good landlord. I want one who's going to fix things when they need to be fixed, who is incentivised to stay in the market, to make sure that I have more stability with my tenancy. A big part as well is what the Land Development Agency will be able to do for people over time, with cost rental apartments, tenancies of indefinite duration, really long tenancies. But look, that's, next year and the year after, and it's, only in certain pockets of Ireland. I know my colleague Brendan Griffin, for example, who's on with you later on, will be able to speak to some of the more specific, challenges that face people in Kerry, as a consequence of the budget, or the opportunities or supports that face that are available to people following the budget. But it is definitely the case that if we want to make sure that tenants are protected, we also have to keep landlords in the market, and there's a balance around that. But one of the big things that's changed, if I could say, is if anybody in Kerry has a child who's perhaps in university, who's in digs, they weren't eligible for the rent credit last year. They are now eligible, and they can get it retrospectively. So please check in with your local TD, check with the revenue. If you're entitled to this, please claim it. It is there to be a support to people.
Okay, all right. Minister for State, Department of Finance, Jennifer Carroll McNeill, thanks for joining us in the programme this morning. If you have a view on what the Minister